Acceptance without consent. Hold this point steady as we begin. Acceptance is often misunderstood as agreement. You are told that if you accept something, you must approve of it, endorse it, or surrender to it. This confusion creates unnecessary resistance. It also creates unnecessary weakness. In Stoic terms, acceptance is not moral approval. It is accurate recognition. Events arrive without asking for your permission. Delays happen. People speak carelessly. Outcomes fail to match effort. None of this requires your agreement. It requires only clarity. The moment you confuse acceptance with agreement, you begin arguing with reality. And that argument is always lost. A Stoic position begins with a simple truth: events themselves carry no judgment. They are facts, movements, occurrences. Disturbance begins only when the mind adds a verdict. When you say, "This should not be happening," or "This means something about me," judgment has already entered. From there, agitation follows automatically. Acceptance means seeing what is present without adding a demand that it be different. It does not mean liking it. It does not mean excusing it. It does not mean surrendering your standards. It means refusing to distort reality with unnecessary commentary. Responsibility begins here. You cannot outsource this distinction to circumstances, to other people, or to the past. If you are disturbed, it is not because something happened. It is because something was judged as intolerable, unfair, or threatening. This is not comforting. It is precise. And precision is the beginning of discipline. Notice this carefully, where authority is commonly misplaced. Everything that follows depends on one clear distinction. There is a difference between what belongs to you and what merely happens around you. Most confusion, frustration, and quiet anger come from treating these as the same domain. You try to manage outcomes as if they were choices. You try to control other people as if they were extensions of your will. When this fails, you experience resistance as injustice. In Stoic terms, what belongs to you is limited but decisive. Your judgments belong to you. Your intentions belong to you. Your choices, refusals, and inner responses belong to you. Nothing else does. Not the behavior of others. Not the timing of events. Not the result of your efforts. These exist outside your authority, regardless of how much you prefer otherwise. This boundary is not pessimistic. It is operational. When effort is applied outside this boundary, it turns into strain. When effort is applied within it, it becomes discipline. Consider a simple delay. You plan carefully, arrive prepared, and still things slow down. Traffic, systems, other people. If you treat the delay as something that should not exist, agitation appears immediately. The delay is not the problem. The assumption that it violates your authority is. The event occurs. The judgment adds friction. Or consider criticism. Someone speaks dismissively, perhaps unfairly. Their words are not yours. Their opinions are not yours. What becomes yours is the internal verdict: this damages me, or this must be answered, or this proves something. At that moment, authority has been misplaced. You have handed control to something external and called it responsibility. Acceptance corrects this error. Acceptance says, "This is happening. That is all." No approval is implied. No agreement is required. Reality is acknowledged without commentary. From there, judgment can be chosen rather than triggered. When you refuse acceptance, you often believe you are standing your ground. In fact, you are surrendering it. You are reacting to conditions instead of responding from principle. The more you insist that reality align with your preferences before you regain calm, the more dependent you become on what you cannot command. This is why Stoic discipline begins with ownership. Not of outcomes, but of judgment. When this boundary is unclear, even good intentions produce exhaustion. You work harder, argue more internally, rehearse explanations, justify reactions. None of this restores authority. It disperses it. Acceptance, properly understood, is a reclaiming of jurisdiction. You are not saying this is right. You are saying this is present. That statement alone prevents unnecessary escalation. It returns decision-making inward. Notice how often resistance appears disguised as principle. You tell yourself you are refusing to accept something because it violates your standards. But standards do not require agitation. They require clarity. You can disapprove without being disturbed. You can act without being reactive. Acceptance removes distortion so action can be deliberate. The mistake is subtle but constant. You confuse acceptance with resignation. Resignation gives up choice. Acceptance preserves it. By seeing clearly what is and what is not yours, you stop wasting effort on the wrong terrain. This distinction is not philosophical decoration. It is the foundation of any stable practice. Without it, discipline collapses into force. With it, effort becomes precise. This explains where effort is misplaced, but not yet how disturbance takes hold, the moment you grant agreement. Now we look at what actually creates disturbance. Events do not strike the mind as conclusions. They arrive as impressions. A sound, a delay, a facial expression, a message on a screen. These impressions are automatic. You do not choose them. They appear before any reasoning takes place. In Stoic terms, this is not yet a problem. The problem begins at the next step. The mind interprets the impression and quietly adds meaning. This is disrespect. This is a failure. This is a threat. That addition is judgment. And judgment is not automatic in the same way. It is optional, even though it feels instantaneous. Between impression and reaction sits a narrow space. In that space, the mind either assents or withholds assent. Assent is agreement. It is the moment you say, often without words, yes, this impression is true and demands a response. Disturbance does not come from the impression itself. It comes from this agreement. Acceptance operates precisely here. To accept an impression is to allow it to be present without endorsing the judgment it suggests. You notice the feeling, the thought, the impulse. You do not immediately consent to its conclusion. Consider criticism again. Someone says something sharp. The impression arrives, sound, tone, words. Almost immediately, a verdict presents itself, I am being disrespected. That verdict feels fused to the event, but it is not. It is an interpretation. The disturbance comes when you agree with it without examination. Or consider a delay. The impression is neutral, waiting. The judgment follows, this is wasting my time. When you assent to that thought, irritation appears. If you withhold assent, the delay remains. The agitation does not. This is why acceptance is not agreement. Acceptance allows the impression to exist. Agreement endorses the judgment attached to it. Stoic discipline is the ability to separate these two actions. You may still choose to act. You may correct an error, set a boundary, or leave a situation. None of that requires inner agitation. Action does not require agreement with the judgment that first appeared. In fact, action becomes more precise when agreement is delayed. Many people believe they must immediately side with their thoughts to remain authentic. This is a mistake. Thoughts are proposals, not commands. Feelings are signals, not verdicts. The mind produces them automatically. What you choose is whether to ratify them. The pause before assent is brief but decisive. It may last a single breath. It may last only long enough to notice, this is an impression. That recognition alone weakens the force of the judgment. You regain authorship. This does not mean suppressing emotion. Stoic practice does not aim to eliminate feeling. It aims to prevent feeling from overruling reason. You can feel anger without agreeing that anger is justified. You can feel fear without agreeing that you are threatened. Acceptance allows the feeling to pass through awareness without turning it into policy. When people resist acceptance, they often fear passivity. They imagine that if they do not immediately agree with their judgments, they will become indifferent or weak. The opposite is true. Immediate agreement is what makes reactions compulsive. Delayed assent restores choice. This mechanism operates constantly. Most of it happens unnoticed. With practice, it becomes visible. You begin to see the exact point where disturbance is created. Not by the world, but by consent. Once this point is seen, responsibility becomes precise. You are no longer managing life. You are managing assent. That is a smaller task, but a decisive one. Understanding the mechanism is not enough. It must be trained, discipline without inner coercion. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. Discipline is commonly imagined as force applied inward. You push yourself. You suppress reactions. You endure discomfort while telling yourself to be stronger. This model appears productive, but it is unstable. It relies on tension, and tension eventually breaks. Stoic discipline is not built on coercion. It is built on training. The difference matters. Force tries to overpower the mind after a reaction has already formed. Training works earlier. It reshapes how impressions are met in the first place. When acceptance is confused with agreement, discipline becomes defensive. You brace yourself against life. You treat every inconvenience as something to resist. This produces fatigue, not mastery. The mind is constantly at war with what is happening. Training begins with a different aim. The aim is not to feel nothing. It is to see clearly. Clarity reduces the need for force. When you recognize an impression as an impression, much of its pressure dissolves on its own. Ascesis, in the Stoic sense, means repeated, deliberate practice. Not heroic effort. Not dramatic restraint. Small, consistent adjustments to how attention is applied. You are not training outcomes. You are training recognition. For example, when irritation appears, the untrained response is immediate justification. Of course I'm annoyed. Discipline does not argue with the feeling. It observes the process. Impression. Judgment offered. Assent pending. This observation interrupts compulsion. The goal is not to win an internal argument. It is to avoid unnecessary ones. Each time you withhold automatic assent, you strengthen the capacity to choose. That capacity is the muscle being trained. Many people wait to practice discipline until pressure is high. This is backwards. Training happens before pressure, in ordinary moments. Mild delays. Minor criticism. Small inconveniences. These are not obstacles. They are repetitions. Repetition matters more than intensity. One clean pause practiced daily is more effective than rare acts of endurance. Stoic discipline accumulates quietly. It does not announce itself. It simply reduces reactivity over time. Notice also what discipline does not do. It does not demand perfection. You will assent too quickly. You will react. This is not failure. Failure would be refusing to observe what happened next. Each reaction is information. Training uses that information rather than condemning it. This is why guilt is unhelpful. Guilt adds another unexamined judgment, I should not have reacted. That judgment produces more disturbance. Discipline replaces guilt with analysis. What impression was present? Where did assent occur? What could be done earlier next time? Acceptance plays a stabilizing role here. When you accept that impressions will arise and that mistakes will occur, you stop wasting energy on self-criticism. Energy returns to practice. Practice improves response. Force tries to dominate the mind. Training educates it. One creates resistance. The other creates alignment. Over time, the mind learns that not every impression requires agreement. Space appears naturally. This is not passive. It is precise. You are not becoming indifferent. You are becoming selective. selective with agreement, selective with reaction, selective with where effort is placed. When discipline is understood this way, it becomes sustainable. It no longer depends on mood or motivation. It depends on routine attention. That attention can be renewed even after lapses. This only works when applied, practice without internal drama. This practice is proven in ordinary moments. Daily life supplies all the training material you need. Not in extremes, but in repetition. The Stoic approach does not wait for crises. It works with what appears every day, because that is where habits are formed. The first practice is accurate anticipation. This does not mean rehearsing failure or expecting the worst. It means recognizing that interruptions, delays, misunderstandings, and friction are normal features of life. When you expect smoothness by default, every deviation feels like a violation. When you expect variability, impressions arrive with less force. You might begin a day knowing that plans will be interrupted, that messages may be unclear, that others will act from their own judgments. This is not pessimism. It is precision. You are aligning expectation with reality rather than fantasy. The second practice is the pause before assent. When an impression arrives, the aim is not to analyze it exhaustively. One breath is enough. That breath creates space. In that space, you remind yourself, this is an impression, not a verdict. You do not need to suppress the thought. You do not need to replace it with a positive one. You simply delay agreement. Often, the intensity fades on its own. If action is still needed, it can be taken without agitation. This pause can be practiced anywhere. While reading a message, while waiting, while listening. It is quiet and unremarkable. No one else needs to know it is happening. That is part of its strength. The third practice is evening review. At the end of the day, you look back without praise or condemnation. You observe where assent was given too quickly. You note where a pause was maintained. This is not a moral inventory. It is a technical one. If guilt appears during review, that is another impression to be examined. Guilt is often mistaken for responsibility. It is not. Responsibility clarifies. Guilt clouds. When you feel guilty, ask what judgment produced it. Usually it is the belief that a mistake invalidates progress. That belief can be corrected. The purpose of review is adjustment. What impression caught you off guard? What expectation was unrealistic? Where could attention be placed earlier next time? These questions improve practice without emotional weight. Notice that none of these practices require withdrawal from life. You do not need special conditions. You do not need silence or isolation. Discipline is not a separate activity. It is woven into how you meet what occurs. Acceptance supports all three practices. By accepting that impressions will arise, that reactions will sometimes happen, and that progress is uneven, you remove unnecessary resistance. Practice continues instead of stopping. Many people abandon discipline because they expect visible results quickly. Stoic practice produces subtle changes first. Less internal commentary. Shorter reactions. Faster recovery. These are signs of training taking effect. Consistency matters more than success. Missing a pause does not negate the practice. Noticing that you missed it reinforces awareness. Awareness is the currency here. Over time, a shift occurs. You find yourself less compelled to agree with every thought. Space appears before reaction. That space is not dramatic. It is functional. It allows choice. This is how philosophy leaves abstraction. It becomes operational. Not through intensity, but through repetition. When this practice becomes stable, a different kind of freedom appears, freedom that cannot be revoked. Freedom is often misunderstood. Many people associate freedom with comfort, ease, or the absence of resistance. By that definition, freedom is fragile. It depends on conditions remaining favorable. The Stoic understanding is different. Freedom is authority over judgment. And that authority remains available regardless of circumstances. When acceptance is mistaken for agreement, freedom is surrendered prematurely. You believe that to accept what happens is to submit to it. In reality, refusal to accept is what places you under its control. The more you demand that reality change before you regain composure, the more dependent you become on what you cannot command. Inner freedom begins when authority is returned to where it belongs. Not to outcomes. Not to other people. To judgment. You may still prefer certain results. You may still work toward change. But your inner state is no longer held hostage by whether those efforts succeed. This does not mean life becomes easier. Difficulties remain. Loss, inconvenience, misunderstanding, and limitation do not disappear. What changes is your relationship to them. They no longer determine your inner posture by default. Consider the difference between comfort and freedom. Comfort seeks ease. It avoids friction. It requires conditions to cooperate. Freedom tolerates friction without surrendering clarity. It does not need conditions to be pleasant to remain intact. A person can be comfortable and unfree, constantly anxious about preserving favorable circumstances. A person can be uncomfortable and free, grounded in the knowledge that judgment remains theirs. Stoicism values the second condition, not because discomfort is desirable, but because authority matters more than ease. Acceptance stabilizes this authority. By acknowledging what is present without protest, you stop expending energy on denial. That energy becomes available for deliberate response. You may act, adjust, withdraw, or persist. The key is that action comes from choice, not compulsion. This is why Stoic freedom is described as maintenance rather than achievement. There is no final state where freedom is secured permanently. Each impression tests it. Each judgment either preserves it or relinquishes it. The work is ongoing, but it is also contained. You are not managing the world. You are managing assent. When this is understood, pressure decreases. You no longer need to resolve everything immediately. You do not need to win every internal argument. You only need to notice where agreement is being granted too quickly. Even setbacks take on a different meaning. When you react poorly, freedom has not been destroyed. It has been temporarily unattended. Attention can be returned. Practice resumes. Nothing essential has been lost. This removes drama from discipline. There is no heroic narrative. There is no failure identity. There is only correction. Correction is quiet. It does not require self-punishment. It requires observation. Freedom, in this sense, is not visible to others. It does not announce itself. It appears as steadiness, as proportionate response, as the absence of unnecessary inner conflict. These signs are subtle, but durable. Nothing outside you must change for this to begin. No permission is required. No conditions must be met. The next impression is enough. The next pause is enough. Authority is reclaimed in small moments, repeatedly. This is not idealism. It is practical containment. You are no longer scattered across outcomes and reactions. You are centered on the one function that remains yours. Nothing more needs to be added, responsibility that cannot be delegated. Nothing here requires escalation. Acceptance is not agreement. It is the refusal to argue with what is already the case. Agreement is a judgment you grant afterward. When these are confused, responsibility is misplaced and freedom is quietly surrendered. The central Stoic claim is simple and demanding. What disturbs you is never the event itself, but the judgment you add to it. That judgment feels automatic only because it has been practiced without interruption. Once seen, it can be interrupted. Once interrupted, it can be trained. This places responsibility exactly where it belongs. Not on circumstances. Not on other people. Not on how things should have gone. Responsibility rests on assent. On whether you agree with the story your mind offers, or whether you pause long enough to examine it. Acceptance does not excuse injustice. It does not endorse failure. It does not require passivity. It clears perception so that response is not corrupted by agitation. From that clarity, action becomes deliberate instead of reactive. Imperfection remains. You will still react. You will still agree too quickly at times. Stoic discipline does not deny this. It refuses to justify it. Each reaction is simply another opportunity to see the mechanism more clearly. Nothing more dramatic is required. This is why responsibility cannot be outsourced. No one else can assent for you. No situation can remove that function. Even when circumstances are restrictive, judgment remains available. That is the final boundary. The work does not accumulate as achievement. It accumulates as steadiness. Fewer internal arguments. Shorter disturbances. Faster returns to clarity. These are quiet signs, but they are reliable. Acceptance keeps the field clear. Discipline trains the response. Freedom is maintained through attention, not attained through force. The work is simple. It is not easy. And it is yours. Return to what is yours.